songwriting saved my life. Everything we're talking about and that we're going to continue to talk about, I processed through writing songs. And it just became the way that I did it. I'm rooted in storytelling songwriting. That's kind of where my knowledge of how to write a song came. And then honestly, it just poured out of me because it had to go somewhere. And it poured out of me in songwriting, and it poured out of me in drinking, and it poured out of me in, all these other healthy and unhealthy ways. Because all of that, the trauma that we hold in and the experiences that have shaped us, like they come out somehow. Yeah. And then getting sober, I was like, okay, there are healthy ways to do this and unhealthy ways.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. I'm so excited to be here with my new friend, Fimone. Hi. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start off by saying this introduction. What happens when a celebrated artist, Fimone, faces challenges no one sees coming? Today, we dive into the incredible story, a journey filled with triumph, heartbreak, and transformation. From tragedy to triumph, you won't believe what she's learned and how it's changed everything. It isn't just another interview, it's an invitation to understand the side of Fimone that you've never seen before, so stay tuned. You're in for something truly unforgettable. Let's kick things off.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for that amazing introduction.
Thank you for being patient with me.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm so glad we're here. You have such an amazing, I just have to say, I love your style. Among other things that I love about you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's always a work in progress. I think it's a lot like our outside can be a representation of our inside, if we want it to be. And so, it's always like shifting and changing. It's art to me.
Can I say yes, completely, and challenge the latter part of what you just said?
Yeah.
If we want it to be.
Yeah.
Because I actually think the truth is, even when we don't want it to be, it is. Yes. Because I've lived in the space where I didn't challenge any of the outward stuff because it was actually a representation of me not challenging any of the inward stuff either. It wasn't me wanting to embrace what was inside. It was actually a sincere reflection of I'm going to wear my collared Oxfords and khakis everywhere because this is what we do, and how I can't be out of place or what have you, right? Like that's not me expressing in a way, a positive way, right? Like that's a result, a subconscious, a fear-based deal. I think what you were speaking to is when we get to choose to step into that place of self-growth and discovery. Love that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, thinking about how I can best feel comfortable and like show people how I want to be represented, and and a lot of it is being an independent artist and getting really creative with what you have. And I think there's a saying about ingenuity comes from necessity, right? And I feel like that a lot. And so I really appreciate you loving my outfit because, I am an independent artist. I don't have a hair and makeup person. I don't have a stylist. I have really great friends who believe in me and what I'm doing, so thank you.
Yeah. I think that absolutely. And I think that it makes it, there's so much more, I love knowing that because it makes it so much more special and meaningful.
Aww.
So yeah, there's a lot of hard work when you're an independent artist because I feel like so many people can understand the people that are like, yeah, I work a corporate job and 3 people above me quit. So they gave me a promotion, but I'm working 3 full-time jobs now. And I equate that in the artistry world as like, until you get to a certain point, and many times for a very long time, you're filling all the roles.
Absolutely. And I have been doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm used to doing that. And it is an amazing feeling when I am in a place where other people are helping with that. So, yeah.
You've got, from what it sounds like, a great community here in Nashville, and you've been here for quite some time. How long did you say?
Yeah, I've been in Nashville for 17 years.
That's a long time.
So it's a long
A
time.
lot of life changes.
Yeah. I grew up here.
Yeah.
You know, I moved here in my early 20s, and I am in my 40s, and proudly in my 40s as a woman. And I grew up here. I went through, think about your life from your early 20s onward. You know, it's a long time.
I think about 5-year chunks. I just had a mind explosion when somebody it came up in conversation the other day that we're approaching the 5-year anniversary of, I hate calling it anniversary, but the 5-year anniversary of COVID coming to the United States. And I mean, I know it's been a long time, but for me, when I think about how like life changes, how much life, you know, all the things of how you evolve as a human, go through growth, struggles, change, all that stuff. My brain wraps around 5-year chunks as like, those are that encapsulates a whole period, and then you're on to a next one. And it, I can't believe it's been that long since COVID slapped us. But totally separate topic. That's so many chunks of 5 years.
It's so many chunks of 5 years. Yes, it's like 3.5 chunks of 5 years.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that about COVID, because recently I had the realization. My wife and I just celebrated 8 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
And I had the realization recently that we have now been married for longer after COVID than before.
Oh, wow.
And that was mind blowing, because when COVID happened, we had been married for 3 years. And I remember thinking, we got this. We've been married for 3 years. And like, it was hard for everybody. And then we just recently celebrated our 8-year anniversary. And I was like, wait a minute. We were only together for 3 years before COVID, and now 5 years after. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's interesting how a major trauma, like especially a shared major trauma, your life turns into before and after.
Oh.
In reference of time.
Yes.
And I know we're going to get into this in a minute, but especially in the realm of like pre-sobriety, post-sobriety. I mean, like, how often do we talk about that? Like all the time, because there's such a drastic, everything is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have been sober from alcohol for 10 years. Yes. And there is a distinct distinction.
Oh yeah, that's a level above distinction. It's like the extra one.
I'm glad you're familiar.
Yeah. Only like the intellectual elite understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it is so clear in my mind. Like I say, the two greatest days of my life are when I got sober and when I married my wife. Like,
yeah,
you know, and for me, one would not have happened without the other.
Oh yeah.
I would have never been able to have the relationship I have with my wife without being sober, ever. So yeah, there's a complete distinction. And quite frankly, like I would be dead.
Yeah.
I would not be sitting here.
Same here.
I would have been, this is gonna, jails, institutions, or death. I would have been dead. So, or in jail, and that wouldn't have been funny.
Whenever I talk about that too, I'm like, it's not one of these things would have happened. I would have been dead, and jails and institutions would have happened
before, maybe. Right.
If I didn't die really fast.
Yeah.
Like, it's like that might have been something like slowing things down along the way, potentially. Like, you know, but I was going to start with music first, but since we're talking about it,
it's okay. It's all connected.
It is all connected.
We'll interweave around it.
Yeah. Did you grow up in a household where they drank? What was your relationship or knowledge base of alcohol and or drugs?
Yeah. Great question. I never saw my parents drunk. They didn't smoke. They did no drugs. I grew up in a double wide on 80 acres on a generationally poor farm that my great-grandfather bought from the people who put a white flag in the land to claim it. In 1899, my great grandfather bought it.
Wow.
So I grew up in rural Minnesota, literally in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours west of Minneapolis, in a town of 2,000 people, where my graduating high school class was 69 people. Wow. And that took 3 towns to make up one school. So when we talk about like rural America,
yeah,
this is rural America. This is not the picture we think of when we see rural America. So anyway, no, my parents didn't do any of that. They were too busy trying to survive. My father was trying to run a generational cattle farm that was being put out of business by giant corporations, farmers who were raising thousands of beef cattle, literally 6 miles down the road. And my father had a herd of 30 on organic before organic was organic. My mother was a nurse, and she worked 65 hours a week and basically supported our family.
Wow.
So there was, and they were, you know, we weren't perfect. Nobody's perfect,
Yeah.
but yes. I have an older brother who's 5 years older than me. I found out he was gay when I was about 13. He was 18. I was just telling somebody this story the other day. I was snooping around and reading the backs of his senior pictures. And I saw people that were writing, "Oh my God, thank you for telling me you're gay. Your secret's safe with me." And I was like, "Oh, my brother's gay. Oh, okay." So that's the word for the kind of brother I have, because I didn't know any other brother.
At 13, no one had ever explained to you what that meant?
No. And I don't really have a recollection of it being in my life. We were.
You mean in a town where, back then, decades ago, in a town
gay
where
people didn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, and then in the 90s, of course, it was right about that time where also I'm at an age where I started to like pay attention, you know, but, so that's a part of my story, and I love my brother, and we've always felt very, very close. And then of course, when I was in my 20s, I came out, and I realized much earlier, but I really became aware of my own sexuality around like my early 20s, late teens. And that plays a huge part into my journey of addiction.
Well, can I ask you, since we're talking about this, like, and it's so important in the life of those of us in the LGBTQ plus community in our development, representation. It sounds like you didn't have any.
No, so that's why I moved to Nashville, because what I had was Winona Judd, Reba McEntire, and an AM radio playing every country radio station that my parents could find. The radio was always on. I was raised on music. My mother wanted to be Tammy Wynette. And she didn't tell me that until like a year ago.
Really?
Which I think is beautiful, because she never like put that on me. Like there was no like stage mommy, you know? And when she told me that a year ago, I was like, Mom, I didn't know that. But she was always singing. She was always dancing. It was a very beautiful musical thing. But all we had access to was white country radio. That's all we had access to. Now, also because like this is pre-internet when I'm 10, 11, 12, right? Internet was right around, I don't know where you are, but like...
I'm just like barely
right
younger than you.
Internet was 13, 14, and then like skyrocketed, right?
Yeah.
So after that is different, and I had access, and you know, I mean, Angelina Jolie was my first crush that I remember.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, okay. Where were we?
Well, so we rabbit trailed, and I think it was like perfect thought pattern. And I was asking you more about, you know, okay, so you describe for me your family life. You didn't have you weren't surrounded by addiction. We did touch on your brother, being gay. I always love finding out about how like when there's like 2 siblings in a family, because it's just an interesting dynamic to talk about, especially for the younger. You were younger than him, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. 13, and he came out at 7. Or you found out at 17. Did he come out then?
He came out publicly to my mother at 18. When he moved, he left the farm and he moved to Minneapolis, the big city. And he was able to become himself.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go right into what we're talking about now. So I'm gonna tell a little bit about his story because it's so influential for me. So he moved to the big city, went to college, and in the late 90s, what was happening is methamphetamines were becoming very quickly a gay party drug. And so you had a bunch of young gay men, people like my brother, who were experiencing this identity that they had to hide their entire lives. Not only hide, but not even really understand because they didn't have representation. Move to a big city, be able to come out, be able to go to nightclubs with other men who felt the same way that they did.
Find a real connection. And then, unfortunately, what we had in those clubs was methamphetamines, drugs, the party drug. My brother was 18 and he was surrounded by it. And of course he tried it. Now, the thing with a drug like that is you don't just try it one time and never do it again. And the addiction rate for a drug like that is so immediate and so high. So my brother became addicted, and my brother had a decade-long journey that was awful, and scary, and scared me away from those types of drugs, which ironically I thank him for. And then I'll get to my story, but this is so important into my story. And it's also important because I think it's so important that we learn to look at addiction. It is not the person, it is the drug. It is not the person. It is the drug and everything surrounding that. So you have this epidemic, honestly, of young gay men becoming addicted to this. And of course, then it spread everywhere and already was happening everywhere. But 10 years later, he actually moved to Nashville and got clean and has been clean and is current. He moved to Nashville to get to get sober?
Yeah, he moved in with me.
Wow.
He was really struggling, and I was about 23, 24. I'd been here for maybe 2 years. And he called me one day and was not doing well. And I said, I am going to buy you a bus ticket because I didn't have money for a plane ticket. And he got on a bus and he came down to Nashville with 2 garbage bags full of his clothes, and he moved in with me and he got sober. And today my brother is getting his MBA, and he has an amazing job with a corporation that he does like accounting for. And he is one of my biggest heroes, and he saved his own life, and he's been clean and sober for, nearly 20 years at this point.
Gosh, I love hearing that so much.
Yeah.
You know, the addiction and mental health issues, as we know, affect disproportionately affect our entire LGBTQ plus community. But, you know, honing in more on like what you were talking about with the gay men, specifically, like we're still seeing the consequences of what started during that time of uppers or drugs in the upper category being so rampant in the gay men's scene, because it's something that it's one of those things that until, you know, generational cycles, curses, people start healing their trauma, finding healthy connection, those kinds of things. And people are doing it. There are people like me, people like, you know, that like your brother, that are examples of, you know, healing themselves. And I'm so hopeful that in my lifetime that won't be a stereotype that has truth to it anymore.
Yeah.
You know? So
speaking on that real quick, there's a great TikToker, and I cannot remember his name, but he is a recovering addict, specifically from what we just talked about. And he has a TikTok, and he says like recovering from Tina, and he talks all about like his story and how to help. And I just think that's what we need more of. Yeah. Like that representation, you know? So I don't know who he is, but he's amazing. So I'm curious because I want to, and you know, people who get it. Like I have a smile on my face because I know there's humor involved. There's like the culture of it. There's all the, you know. Yep. So back to you. Yes. You have, like, I'm thinking about you being home. He's gone to Minneapolis. You know, he's gay. He's also really important. Y'all have a bond.
do you know that he's like fallen into the nightlife drug scene at that point?
Not yet. So it took me until then I went to college in Minneapolis.
Okay.
So he went to the University of Minnesota. So I went to the University of Minnesota.
Sure. He was your representation. He was your role model, right? I mean, like,
yes.
Yeah.
And still, even though when I was in college though, so I was dating a man. So this is where my story starts. When I was 16 years old, I met a man who was 6 years older than me, who had access to alcohol. And I was 16. And all my friends were 16. And he bought us all booze. And I thought I was the coolest girl because I had the older boyfriend who was supplying us all with booze. And when you grow up in rural Minnesota...
You were the coolest girl.
I was.
mean, for, you know.
Yes.
I
you know sure thought I was.
Right.
And...
According to them and yourself at the time, yeah.
Yes. and actually, his father owned a liquor store. And so I was 16, 17, 18 years old, going into a liquor store anytime, day or night. And literally he would be like, get anything you want for your friends. And that was my introduction to drinking.
Yeah.
So I started blackout drinking when I was 17 years old. I didn't know that that wasn't normal until I was probably in my very early 20s, when I very distinctly, that's the word of the day, remember a younger acquaintance friend of mine being like, I got so drunk last night that I like don't remember. And I thought, that's not normal.
When you thought that, what did you have an emotion that followed?
Not yet.
Okay.
It was more, oh, that's not normal. And then, yeah, no, I didn't then. It took a lot longer for me to be like, huh. My life had to fall, I had to my life had to become unmanageable.
Same here, but then there's the people that come along that are like, yeah, when that came, I'm always like,
yeah.
What's that like when you get feedback and then you just start listening to your gut?
I was too busy being fabulous. Right?
Yeah, right.
Like, I was too busy being the cool girl,
yeah.
And the rebel and all those things. Yes. So I started blackout drinking, once a week, once every other week, twice a week from 17 to 27 years old. So for a decade. And but my life was manageable somewhat. Okay. I was also in this relationship with this person for a decade.
Wow.
And there is still stuff from that I unpack every day. Okay. I've done a lot of work, but there's still stuff there that I've not unpacked that I slowly unpack. So for me, my story is very tied to this very toxic, very unhealthy relationship that neither one of us knew at the time we were really in. I don't want to speak about their intentions. I have a lot to say about that. I was a child. I was 16 years old. It was sort of this perfect storm of my parents were trying to survive. I'm the youngest of three. My parents had me later in their life. My mom was 36. So by this time, my mom was in her early 50s. She was still working 60 hours a week as a charge nurse at our local hospital. And my father has his own trauma to deal with and was trying to run a farm that was failing, Yeah. So there's little Janelle, 16 years old, and this person pops into her life. So yeah, that's my drinking. And at some point it became not fun anymore. Right. Yeah. And then I continued for a good probably 5 years.
Are you able to pinpoint? I'm not able to pinpoint when mine, because when it, they always talk about it's fun till it's not fun anymore. And so many people are like, it changed during this period when yada, yada, yada. Are you able to identify that transition in your story?
What's interesting about this is it's so much about who we surround ourselves with. because nobody told me. Well, and if they did, I didn't listen.
Yeah.
Or I wasn't ready to hear it. So I'm going to give for all the people.
Or you were blacked out, so you forgot.
Yeah, all the people who are going to be seeing this being like, we tried.
Yeah.
Like, I get that. But also, there is a culture in rural Minnesota where I grew up in high school. You just drank. Like, we're talking, I'm old millennial. My older sister was Gen X. Like, what else did you have to do?
Exactly.
There was nothing else to do. So you just drank, and it wasn't a problem. People didn't really talk about it. And at that point, like, I was hiding from my parents. So, what were they going to do?
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
When I hear you say, this is what was happening for me, but I was still functioning for 10 years in a certain way, that tells me you had a level of like recognition or a framework that you adopted that was, this is okay and acceptable as long as I show up or do enough of this in this way. So are you able to describe like what your perception of like being a young adult, like what framework of that were you working with at that time?
Yeah. Well, high school was a breeze. Okay. I didn't have to do anything and I got A's because, undiagnosed ADHD, but if you sit with me for more than 5 minutes, yeah. Memorization was easy. So our school system, I just memorized and passed. And, I critically think fairly well. So like high school was just easy. And then when I went to college, that was pretty easy too. So I could manage this, like getting blackout drunk twice a week. And I was in my 20s, so it was easier, like just physically. Right?
Yeah, the consequences the next day weren't anything like they graduate to later.
Yeah, and also my closest friends were drinking with me.
Yeah,
I will say I was always the one to get drunk first and pass out last, and that took me a long time to realize. Right, and when I got sober, watching people I know get drunk was a whole other experience. And like, even just I realized when I was sober that I never saw other people drunk because I was the first one to get drunk.
Well, because you were the first one to get drunk, and I'm assuming blackout before people were
and then, like,
getting to that level.
Exactly. So like watching people get drunk.
I'm raising my hand for audio listeners right now. Same here. Yeah.
Yeah. So watching people get drunk, I was like, I haven't really experienced this. Like, because I was drunk. And also because I had access to any liquor at 16, this is such an alcoholic thing to say, kind of. I never drank beer because I didn't have to.
Oh, right. Like
I went straight to like 100 proof Southern Comfort. The gate. Once
I started drinking, I was like, why would anybody ever drink beer?
Why are you waste time?
Yeah.
Also ADHD. Well, I got to get this done. I got like 100 proof Southern Comfort. Let's get to it right now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to drink a 6-pack of beer and have a buzz.
I mean, like, yeah. See, this is logical to me. If you got a goal, let's get to it.
But yeah, so my friends were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of. And so getting through college, my parents instilled in me some really great stuff. And so it was like, I felt I wanted to get an education. I was at a liberal college, and I was, my brother opened this door to like other ways of being. And my parents, they didn't, outwardly express any, my parents never said a bad thing to me about my brother. What I did, my mother cried the day my brother got off the phone and told her he was gay. And she said, sit down, I have to tell you something. And I was like, what? She's like, your brother just told me he was gay. And I was like, okay. And I like went in my room and was like, that checks out. Cool. And like, that was it for me. I was like, okay, it's just whatever. And then I found Ellen DeGeneres' mother's book that she wrote after Ellen had come out.
Was it a positive book, or I don't know about the book?
It was a positive book, but it was just her journey.
Okay.
Dealing with it. So
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
But my mother was reading that. That comes up in my memory. And I think that's interesting because I'd never seen my mother read a book. My mother didn't
have
read.
time, or
she didn't have time.
Yeah,
she was not going to read a book.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting.
When you explained to me all that she had on her, I'm like, why would she want to come home when you just want to check out at that point?
And she was a mother of 3 children.
Right. So she couldn't check out. She was doing the dishes, laundry, and feeding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I never heard my parents, they never spoke to me about their process of dealing with it. And looking back now, I know they had to have their own process because they were from a different generation and a different, nobody was outwardly gay in my family that I knew of. Right.
Yeah.
But they never said anything bad to me about it. So then I'm in college and I'm going to graduate college because if I don't, I'll be a failure and we can't have that. Right. I can't drop out of college. I'm better than that.
Right.
Right. But I'm going to be in a very toxic relationship with a man who is enabling something that I'm struggling with. And he's struggling with his own things. And I'm, going to drink twice a week but hold it together, And then as we know, that can't last forever.
Correct.
And then something happens. So I moved to Nashville after I graduated college.
Were you already pursuing music?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So here's my quick history of music. I took piano lessons in 2nd grade. I took piano lessons from 2nd to 4th grade. I was in choir. I was in band. I played the saxophone. I got my first guitar when I was 15, my first electric guitar when I was 15, because my best guy friend had gotten a guitar and I thought he looked so cool and I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And we were listening to his older sister, who was my brother's best friend.
Okay. And
then he and I were best friends.
Yeah.
Her Red Hot Chili Peppers album.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, this is a whole new world. I want this. I've been this tall since I was 15. So they really wanted me to be good at sports. Basketball, volleyball, but I was terrible and I didn't care about competitive sports. So it was right around that age where I was like, nope, I am going to go be a rock star and I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to write songs. And I was also discovering Gwen Stefani in the 90s.
Yeah.
And she was in a sports bra doing push-ups on stage. And I was like, that's it. That's the life for me.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I knew that music was going to be, it became a part of me. And then also I wrote my first song when I was 18. It was called Bonnie and Clyde. But that became how I processed all of my trauma and all of my life was through songwriting. And songwriting saved my life. Everything we're talking about and that we're going to continue to talk about, I processed through writing songs. And it just became the way that I did it.
So many people, myself included, grew up with this either spoken or unspoken way of being that is, if it's not pretty, if it's not socially acceptable, and if it's going to make people feel uncomfortable, deal with it yourself or in private. So many musicians that I talk to that have gone through the healing process articulate with me, there was a time when somebody showed me or told me, gave me the permission and said, you've got to open up and access this part of yourself if the music's going to mean anything. Was there anything or even we'll go back to the word I keep saying, representation, somebody, just the imagery that you knew, you saw, this person is doing that. I've got that, you internalized and realized okay, if they can do that and get that honest and vulnerable through music, this is the one area I can actually do that, where I would never talk about these things otherwise.
I love that question because it's really making me think. I don't feel like I've been asked that, which is great.
Yes.
And there's a ton of things coming to my mind. And the first thing that came to my mind was, as far as representation, Melissa Etheridge. Okay. Huge. And if you look at me and if you listen to my music, it's there. But she was one of the first out gay women that I had access to and that I saw. And that was very influential. Not so much in my songwriting, but in presenting myself like this. And like, if she can do it, I can do it. And then it was like, my musical adventure journey here. And then it was like Tracy Chapman, as a woman guitar player, the only one that I had young was Bonnie Raitt. That was all that I had access to at that time. So representation wise like that. When we get into songwriting, that's such an interesting question because I'm rooted in storytelling songwriting. The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, Reba McEntire. Fancy, Reba McEntire. Great storytelling songs. And 70s and 80s and 90s country music. It was a lot of storytelling songs. And so that's kind of where my knowledge of how to write a song came. And then honestly, it just poured out of me because it had to go somewhere. And it poured out of me in songwriting, and it poured out of me in drinking, and it poured out of me in, all these other healthy and unhealthy ways, because all of that, the trauma that we hold in and the experiences that have shaped us, like they come out somehow.
Yeah.
And then getting sober, I was like, okay, there are healthy ways to do this and unhealthy ways. And then the last part of that answer that I was thinking about while you were asking that is when I was introduced to Nina Simone and her songwriting and her activism, and I realized how powerful songs could be for things like political activism and human rights. And that was the first representation I had of like connecting those dots. Bob Dylan just popped in my head, and he never resonated with me because he's a white straight man. And that was never, ever going to resonate with this because I have a whole other bag of things that I'm trying to figure out over here.
Right.
A little gay girl from rural Minnesota.
As you gave me that answer and you mentioned alcohol, where my mind went to of the whole, when we talk about like our experiences and things, if we don't talk about it, they eventually are going to boil up and come out somehow. And with many people who don't have like a constructive outlet at all, it comes out in only harmful, negative behavior. Sounds like there's a combination there. And what I'm hearing is like, because of alcohol at that time, it enabled you to open up the door and articulate in your music stuff that you would never have said otherwise. Is that true?
Say that again. Because
at the time you were drinking,
right,
did it give you the permission and release that the block would have otherwise been there to actually write about and open up about the stuff, right, that you weren't otherwise talking about in life?
That's interesting. And I think rather how I felt about it, and if I'm reflecting right now, was that songwriting gave me the opportunity to speak about the stuff that I didn't know what to do with. So I processed it through writing it and figuring it out. I still do that to this day. I feel like if I'm having there's a song that I want to write right now about my wife and mine's fertility journey. And I had this thought very recently, a couple days ago, and I said, I want to write that song because these are too big of feelings for me to handle, and I need to sift and sort through it. And the only way I know how to do that is through writing a song about it. And then the answers will become clear to me. So that's really interesting.
So I want to ask you on that note, because I think there are a lot of people that are probably like me. I've been challenged so many times. You should journal. You should, blah, blah, blah. But when you're a perfectionist in certain ways, every time I've sat down and tried to journal, there are certain things that have helped me and I do better with it now. But like, I'm too concerned with doing it right. Like, how precise do I need to be? Start writing something down. And maybe if I get a page, I don't go back to it the next day because I'm like, I don't really know that if it did that right or whatever. I'm curious, when you're talking about songwriting, you're like, I need to get this out. When you sit down and you're doing the process, Is the initial process of structure, or are you just getting whatever you're feeling out on paper?
The process for me has always been the same. I go into other territories. Like I have a friend who makes beats, and that's a whole new thing for me. Mm-hmm. But my process is always the same. I sit down with my acoustic guitar or a piano, mostly an acoustic guitar. The song, the lyrics, the melody, and the chords come at once.
Wow.
So they are puzzle pieces, and they all have to fit together in this moment, and that's how the song is formed for me. That's
special, because that's like not a lot of people have that gift and talent. It's so pieced apart.
Yes.
Wow.
But that is 90% of the time my process. And then then the melody and the chords and the lyrics, they just sort of like all come. And I'm not going to complete a song in one sitting. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But I might have a verse and then a line for a chorus and that melody, and I think about it for a few days, and that's a whole conversation about songwriting process. But
it is. But this is where I want to draw the line, because how many people are listening? Like the majority of people listening aren't songwriters, but the parallel I'm drawing is how therapeutic the process of getting our emotions, feelings, all the things out. Did you ever have an issue with? You just said, I don't always finish in a day or in one sitting. Did you ever have any issue with like leaving it on the table to come back to?
It's interesting, because at this age, I have written and continue to write so many songs that I'm not afraid of a song getting lost, because it's supposed to. And a new song will take its place. And if I'm not compelled to finish a song, I'm not going to force it. There is a difference when it comes to discipline, right? But it's a balance.
Sure.
So, but what's interesting to me, you said you were afraid of journaling for fear of perfectionism. With a song, I think part of the process of leaving it is that it doesn't have to be perfect yet. And if you can just put it off to the side and come back to it and work on it, it becomes like a collaboration with your perfectionism. And you can give yourself time to like finish it.
That's been my growth journey, is embracing the
patience
and the letting go of like what's presented to me, or what's able to be felt and identified within me. It comes up as I'm capable and ready to deal with those emotions.
Absolutely.
And process them.
Everything in its own time.
Right.
And everything in perfect time.
Yes. Okay. So I want to talk about your music and activism very much so, but first I want to, and I don't want to rush it, but I know we're crunched on time. So I want to flush through the, your like drinking.
Yep.
Trajectory.
Yeah.
How did it go from, because it got worse than 3 blackout nights a week to the point of needing to get sober?
Yeah. So when I was 12 years old, I was in a terrible jet ski accident that changed my life. And I didn't know it at the time, because it took me 23 years to process. I was a passenger of a jet ski that slammed into a tree. The jet ski was going 30 miles per hour. The throttle stuck, and this is 1996. It hit the rock shore going about 30 miles an hour and was airborne and hit a tree. And I flew off and hit that tree. I broke my arm in 3 places, my ribs cracked, I collapsed a lung, and my spleen exploded on impact. So I was bleeding internally, and I was lying on the ground waiting for the ambulance to come when I had a near-death experience. And that experience took me 23 years to process. And what's interesting about that is that played a very big part in my drinking. And here's why. Because now this didn't happen, I'm telling you this at 40. This took me 23 years to connect the pieces and to process, and to even admit to myself that I had an experience, because I didn't want to be crazy. I was telling myself that only crazy people have experiences like that. So that was a very big internal piece of alignment for me. The experience that I had while I was laying on the ground waiting for the ambulance, I was in and out of consciousness. Okay. And one of those times I was in and out of consciousness, I left my body, and I didn't see a white light, and I didn't see I didn't have a life review, but I had an experience that I cannot explain, but that was the most peaceful, warm, loving energy that I've ever experienced. And I couldn't tell you how long this took place. It was maybe a fraction of a second. If you've ever fainted or passed out, the moment when you come back, it feels a lot like that. Okay. I realized that when I would drink to blackout, I was trying to get back to a feeling that I had during that experience. So for me, my drinking was also, I was literally trying to kill myself because I was trying to reach something that had happened to me that was unexplainable.
Wow.
I didn't know that while I was drinking. I had all this other life, earth trauma. But when I connected those pieces, I was like, I don't want to drink because I want to live. And I bring that up to say that the night that I made the decision the first time to quit drinking, my roommate, who was my drinking partner, was standing in front of my bed, waking me up, saying, you have to do something. You can't live like this. Because I had gone through a blackout episode where I had driven my car to an ex's house and like don't remember any of this, and then ended up like saying gibberish, and they like drove me back to my house, and it was terrible. And then, but anyway.
So you chose to get sober. What did you do?
I got sent home to my parents in Minnesota, and my mother said, you are going to go to rehab. And in true Amy Winehouse fashion, because she was our representation, I said no. And my mother said, then you have to get a therapist and a psychologist, and you can't go back to Nashville until you have those. So I got a therapist and a psychiatrist. And that was the start of my journey. And then I had a friend who had a NA key tag that I worked with. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, I think I might need help. And I went to a meeting with him for the first time. And then that's another journey. Yeah. But that was my intro, and that saved my life, honestly, because it gave me tools to understand that you didn't have to live like this. That is the most important part, is spreading that statement of you don't have to live like this.
That was going to be my next question, was like, what's the encouragement that you want to leave with people from your experience? And you just said it. I mean, like that.
Yeah, but you don't have to live like that. There is another way.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's better than you could have ever imagined. It's not always easy, but life is not easy, but it is totally worth it.
What action step would you, if it comes to your mind, that you would encourage people to do if they only do one?
Ask somebody you trust for help.
Amen. Okay, I want to ask you before we close out, you talked about your music and activism. Can you mention or tell us about what, you had a song come out yesterday, right? Today.
So it's just
That's
released.
Right.
That's okay. It's just released today. It's called Walls for Norma. It is an acoustic version of a song that I've previously released on my last EP. It's out today. We have a video next week. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this. On March 7th, the day before International Women's Day, I am releasing a single called Woman that is an anthem for all people and all humans who believe in human rights.
Heck yeah. I'm so excited. I got a sneak peek at all of this because your manager is amazing. And I just got I get so excited. I get tingles down my spine when you're such an ambassador and mover of change and just all the things when I think about somebody who uses their gifts to not just make a living, but make an impact.
Well, if I wanted to make a living, I would have left this a long time ago.
Right.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And also, you are the same for having this podcast and supporting voices like mine and yourself.
Thank you. We're going to have all this in the show notes, but I want you to share what's the best way for people to connect with and support what you're doing.
Yes. You can find me on YouTube, Spotify, and all the other platforms at Fimone.
Fimone.
Yes. And my handle on social media is at The Real Fimone, TheRealFimone. That is the biggest way right now.
Perfect. Lovely. Oh my gosh. I wish we had 4 more hours.
You say that to every guest.
No, but I do say, I mean, you're not the only one.
No.
I'll be honest.
I feel like we scratched the surface.
We
could do so much more.
Leave them wanting more.
Yeah.
Right. But thank you for opening up about this. It's such an important story. And sometime we'll have a part 2 and have you back.
Yes. I'll just say the last thing I want to say is it's easy to be yourself and it's hard to be somebody else. So thank you for allowing me the space to be myself.
Thank you for saying that.
It's not always true, but I have found it's easier for me to talk about myself when I'm just authentic and I'm not trying to be somebody else.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you who have tuned in. And I want to remind you that it's never too late to start loving yourself, and you're always only one decision away from a completely different life.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.